Hi, this is Kevin O'Brien with Handelsblatt Global. I'm here in Washington today with Richard Manning. He's the president of Americans for Limited Government, an association that advocates limited government, has about 100,000 members. Mr. Manning, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Donald Trump won a historic victory last night. He ran on a limited government platform. Your organization advocates limited government. What should we expect from President Trump in terms of the size of the federal government?
I think he's going to really reduce the size and scope of government, but most importantly, I think he's going to restore constitutional rule of law, where the president won't be making decisions outside the congressional framework. And I think that's really an important reform to be able to get back to the way things are supposed to be done, so the people will ultimately be the deciders of the type of government that they get. I think Donald Trump restores that government.
So do you believe the size of government will decrease under Mr. Trump?
I think it will. I think over time it will decrease. I think there'll be initially some increases, but I think over time there will be a tightening of the belt in terms of spending, and the increased economic activity will result in more tax revenue, and so we'll see the budget deficit lessening over the course of his 4-year term.
You're not only you were not only in the think tank business, so to speak. You worked in the Labor Department under George W. Bush.
Right.
So you've seen government from the inside. If I could ask, it's often hard to shrink bureaucracies. Why will Mr. Trump be more successful than his predecessors?
Well, I hope he'll be more successful because comes from a business perspective. He knows about bottom lines. He knows about whether or not people are engaging in efficiencies and the real value of personnel. And so because of that background, because of his normal kind of everyday way of doing business, I think he'll be looking at government completely differently than somebody who's grown up in the business of government. And I think that'll make a huge difference.
Mr. Trump last night in his victory speech promised an infrastructure program that would put millions of Americans back to work. Is it ironic that a man elected to limit the size of government may start out, in a sense, by expanding it?
Well, I think using government to do basic government functions makes sense. The truth is, what he's going to do is he's going to change the emphasis on government. He's going to take the government and have it do the things that actually drive American interests. When he does that, I think there'll be a lot of shifting of resources around. Initially, there may be an increase in expenditures because of this infrastructure effort, but over the long term, I think you'll see a belt tightening, and that will come back in terms of tax revenues and also through other cuts throughout the government.
Assuming the infrastructure program costs billions of dollars, how do you think the U.S. government will end up financing that? By raising debt or by cutting existing expenditures?
Up front, I think they're going to raise debt. It's a traditional way it's been done. A lot depends on what happens in our upcoming lame duck session, and the hope is that there will be a short-term funding program in the lame duck session, and then Donald Trump will be able to put his stamp on the next budget that's starting about April 1. That's our hope for outcome, at which point we won't be stuck with President Obama's budget. We'll instead have Donald Trump from day one being able to imprint his vision on what the U.S. government should be spending money on.
The Republican Party took a clean sweep of the White House and the Congress, so they control the legislative and the executive. Does this mean that the necessary budget cuts to fund the new priorities like an infrastructure program will be easy and quick?
Nothing's easy and quick in Washington. It's all hard fought and difficult. Every interest group, the reason money's being spent is because somebody wants it spent. I think that the real answer, though, is that yes, Donald Trump he has a mandate. He does have a Congress that doesn't have any excuse but to act like Republicans and limit government spending. And as a result, I think he'll make progress on things like health care reform and other things, which are big, giant expenditures that will now be able to be narrowed down, allowing for expenditures in other areas.
You mentioned health care reform. Mr. Trump has promised to repeal Obamacare. He also, though, promised last night to help America's forgotten middle class. Now, if he were to take health insurance away from these members of the forgotten middle class, wouldn't he be alienating his own voters?
almost every American gets their health care from their employer. The Obamacare doesn't really do anything except for raise the rates for most people's cost of insurance. It remains to be seen whether or not what will happen in terms of people on Medicaid and people lower income. I think there'll be some cuts there, but the truth is, when you look at that expenditure, people in the middle class get their insurance from their employer. Nothing will change. Changing the rules, however, in Obamacare will lower those costs for that health insurance, helping save Americans a lot of money.
Last question, and thanks for being with us today. Mr. Trump ran against the Washington establishment, so to speak. He won in a landslide. Does that mean the Washington universe of interest groups, think tanks, lobbyists is over as we know it?
I wish, but I don't think so. Some things are almost like cockroaches. They survive nuclear blasts. And I think the Washington, D.C. establishment's a lot like that. However, I think they're going to be severely chastened and will have dramatically less influence as a result of this. And that is good for America. There's nothing wrong with lobbyists. There's absolutely nothing wrong. They petition the government and represent people to do so. What's wrong is when the lobbyists are controlling things to the adverse impact on the people who are supposed to be giving the consent for the government.
Mr. Manning, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.